Hey guys, it's me, Kari. If you hear noise in the background, it's just my mom microwaving a cup of tea and apparently going outside. But anyway, we're going to pick up with Dicey's song, and we are actually at the start of a chapter again, so that's pretty cool. And we'll read for 15-20 minutes or so. So my video doesn't run out and you guys don't lose attention. All right. Mr. Lingerly stayed to have supper with them, stayed for music after supper, stayed even after Sammy and Maybeth had gone upstairs to bed. Dicey regretted having built a fire when she came back into the living room to see him sitting in front of it. He leans toward the crackling logs with a dreamy expression on his face. Graham was coming out of the kitchen with another cup of coffee for the man. She looked at Dicey and shrugged her shoulders. What did that mean, Dicey wondered. Mr. Lingerly took the cup and said for about the 10th time, I should be going. Have I thanked you properly? Graham asked him. For what? For staying out here today? I enjoyed myself, didn't I, James? I think he did, James assured his grandmother. He and Dicey were playing a game of Parcheesi on the rug in front of the fire. Dicey's right side felt hot and her left side felt cool, and that reminded her of every other time she had sat in front of fires. She kind of liked the way fires went to extremes. Either it was too hot or too cold. It had been the same way with the big kerosene stove they used to heat their drafty cabin back up home in Provincetown. She rattled the dice in her cup and let them roll out onto the board. James looked at her roll and then studied the board to see what moves her men might make. James, Graham spoke. He looked up. Dicey and I were talking about Maybeth today, and we thought you might have some ideas. Mr. Lingerly put down his cup so fast the china clattered. I'm sorry, I didn't realize, he said. He started to push himself up out of the chair. I've stayed too long. I was just too comfortable. I'd better get going. Dicey knew she shouldn't have been surprised at his quick perception of what Graham was saying, but she was. She kept making the same mistake, she guessed, thinking that because he was heavy and clumsy in his body, he was the same way in his mind. She should have known better from listening to his piano playing, if for no other reason, or the way he joined with harmony, the way they sang. Or the way he joined in with harmony when they sang, or the way Maybeth trusted him, she reminded herself. Graham answered Mr. Lingerly. You might as well stay. You know Maybeth, so you might be able to help. He hesitated, rocking up back and forth to get out of the chair, then sitting back, then lurching forward again. I thought about it, young man, before I brought up the subject. If you wanted me to leave, you'd say so, wouldn't you? Mr. Lingerly asked. He answered himself. Yes, you would. I don't know you well, but I know you that well. Graham just waited for him to finish. Now about Maybeth, she began. She told them what Maybeth's teacher had said, and the notion she and Dicey shared about Maybeth not being able to learn the way this school taught reading. While Graham was talking, James quietly picked up the pieces and the dice and the cups and the board and put them back into their box. Dicey didn't say a word. Neither did Mr. Lingerly. She said Maybeth is flunking? James asked at last. She said that? Not exactly. She said at this rate, Maybeth could never complete the work for 3rd grade. It's only November, James protested. How can she know? What's she like anyway, this Miss Jackson? She's perfectly ordinary, except she's one of those people who think that if you just work hard enough, everything will go your way, Graham said. That's why Maybeth puzzles her, upsets her. What's wrong with Maybeth anyway? James demanded. Dicey thought she knew what he was thinking, that Maybeth was like Mama. Nothing's wrong with her, she said quickly. You know that, and I know that, James. All right, he agreed, looking down at his hands. It's just... Besides, she's making friends, isn't she? She's slow, Dicey said. We've always known that. Slow at school. Because she's shy, he pointed out. Not only shy, Graham told him, but that too. What we want to know is, do you have any ideas? Ideas? About what to do about Maybeth, Graham repeated patiently. Oh, sure, but nothing any good. She could go into a special school, or we could take her out of school and have tutors. It's only 7 years until she can quit. We could work harder with her, helping her, but she works so hard already. Poor Maybeth, he said. You can do better than that, James, Graham snapped at him. He looked up, hurt and surprised. He started to answer, then stopped himself. His eyes went back to the long shelf of books behind the desk. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. All right, let's think about it. The basic problem is reading, isn't it? Right now, yes, Graham said. Maybeth isn't learning how to read. Now, what does that mean? It means... Dicey let out a gust of exasperated air. What was James doing now? He looked at her and shook his head to stop her saying anything. It means she reads slowly, can't remember what she has read, out loud or silently, because she hasn't understood the words, because of her mistakes, and because if you go so slowly, it must be like if you try to walk in slow motion, you always lose your balance. He stopped speaking then. He was staring hard at his hands spread out on the rug. The light from the flames made shadows that moved across his face. Graham got impatient. Well? I'm thinking, James said. Let me think, because what all that means... Maybeth sees the words with her eyes, but she doesn't connect them in her brain right away, the way I do. The question is why the connection isn't made. So that if we want to solve the problem, we have to work on the connection part of it. He raised his face and smiled at them all. I don't understand, Dicey said. Look, Maybeth can talk, can't she? So she knows the meanings. She can see, so she can see the words, but she doesn't make the connection. When he put it that way, Dicey thought she could understand, but she didn't see that it helped them any. Okay, James said eagerly. Now listen. The way Mrs. Jackson teaches, and I guess the whole school system, is to look at a whole word and recognize it. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what we should do. What do you mean? Graham demanded. Well, Maybeth sees the whole word, but that doesn't make sense to her because she can't remember it as a word. But we know she can remember the letters. Maybe she should be working on reading the letters, not the whole word. But she can read some whole words, Dicey protested. I've heard her. Yes, but not as many as the other third graders can. That's where the slowness comes in. Do you mean we should go back to the beginning with her? Graham asked. Do all the lists again? James shook his head hard. No, I mean we should try another way. I have to think more about it. I don't know anything about the subject. I'll have to go to the library. But that's what I think would work for Maybeth. Another way. I don't know, Graham said doubtfully. Dicey had a sudden memory of Millie reading cornflakes for corn chips. You mean what Maybeth does is sees like the beginning of the word and then she guesses? James nodded. And she's not a guesser by nature, Dicey went on. She didn't know exactly what James had meant, but she could see how it would work on Maybeth, this guessing. It would make her nervous, and she'd always be waiting to be caught in a mistake, and she wouldn't hear what she was reading, so it would be hard for her to understand what she was reading. Maybeth likes knowing how to do what she's doing. When she gets nervous and scared, she can't think about things. Graham looked over at Mr. Lingerly. Do you have anything to add? No, he shook his head, except to say that I never found Maybeth stupid, but you know that already. We do, Graham said, but sometimes we get to doubting. It's good to hear. All right then, James, you'll do some reading on the subject in a hurry. I'll do it when I can, as soon as I can. I've got my job and all, James said. Dicey felt her mood of hopefulness fading as she remembered that James was good at ideas, but not so good at following them through. She made a mental note to remind him. The next day was Sunday, and Dicey had a whole afternoon to work on the boat. It was a cool afternoon, but in her new jeans she was warm enough. Sunlight came in through the opened doors, a broad beam of yellow light. Dust motes danced lazily up and down in the light. Dicey stood, pulling the scraper across the curved planks. She was singing to herself. When first unto this country a stranger I came. She wasn't thinking about anything in particular. She was wondering vaguely how long she should give James before she reminded him, and wondering how long Mr. Chappelle would take correcting their essays, how long before she got her essay back. Sammy came in and stood beside her. She broke off the song in her thoughts. She hoped he wouldn't stay too long, because she had been enjoying her mood. Graham's teaching Maybeth how to knit, he reported. Is she? I just said so, Sammy pointed out. Yes, you did, Dicey agreed. Can I help you? Is there wood to cut? Graham said Mrs. Teed says I'm good. So I heard, Dicey said. She hadn't looked at him yet, and she didn't plan to. He stayed for a few seconds, as if waiting for her to say something or do something. Then he turned sharply away. He turned so sharply, his shoulder shoved against Dicey's. The blade of the scraper dug into the wood. Sammy, she yelled, watch out what you're doing. He was already by the barn doors, standing in the stream of sunlight. He turned back to face her, and the sunlight glowed around him. Sammy had gotten taller, in his legs especially, she thought. His hands were on his hips, and his face was hard. It was as if he was daring her. Daring her to do what? Start a fight, probably. She stared at him, and he stared at her. Then Dicey began to remember. She remembered Sammy's sturdy brown legs walking all that long summer long, keeping up with the bigger kids. And she remembered Sammy, memory going backwards, like flipping through a photograph album, until she came to a vague picture of the little baby mama brought home from the hospital. Their father had walked out by then. He'd left pretty soon after Mama told them that Sammy was coming. Because she was the oldest, Sammy was Dicey's responsibility. She was the one who changed his diapers and fed him cereal on a spoon when Mama was at work. She was the one who watched him sleeping in the night until Mama got home. She was the one he'd splashed water all over in his baths in the dishpan, slapping at the water with his chubby little hands, and his eyes laughed. His hands looked strong now, and you could see the bones running from his wrists to his fingers. His eyes weren't laughing now. They were as flat as his mouth. Their colors didn't shine out at her. No wonder, she said to herself, still looking back at his expressionless face, feeling for a minute as if she were Sammy, and hearing the conversations they'd just had as he might have heard it. Or, she corrected herself, the conversation they hadn't just had. "Can you find me some sandpaper?" she asked him. "Why?" he asked without moving. It was as if he wanted to stay angry. "So I can sand this place smooth, and then," Dicey thought fast, and it seemed like a good plan, "if you really do want to help." "I do," he cried, running back to the woodbench. "I can," he cried. "The next thing after scraping is sanding. We'll have to sand it down about 3 times, 3 different times," the book said. "Why so many?" He passed her a square of sandpaper. "I don't know. It just said that was the best way to do it. I'm planning to do this job the best way, start to finish." "Good-o," Sammy said. "If you show me I could sand where you've already scraped, I could be careful." "Yes, I think you could," Dicey said. His eyes had colors shooting out of them again, yellow flecks and green that made up the hazel color when they mixed in with the brown. He hadn't grown so tall after all, she noticed, measuring him against her body. Not up to her shoulders yet. They settled down to work. Sammy worked like Dicey did, without hurrying, without dawdling. They got into kind of a rhythm, working together. Dicey told herself, "I should have remembered this about Sammy." "I like these new jeans," she remarked, "don't you?" He said. "I guess you and Graham had a good time. Do you think she'd ever take me for a bus ride now to lunch? Ever?" "I don't see why not, but she tells you what to order." "Did she tell you what to order?" "Yep." "What did you do?" "I ordered it. What do you think I did?" Sammy laughed, a round tumbling sound. I think you'd refuse to get it because she told you." Sammy nodded, looking at Dicey. "Oh, Graham said you're being an angel at school, except you don't fly." Sammy nodded, looking at Dicey's eyes. "It's all I can do, being good. Nobody there's even yelled at me all this year so far. That's pretty good, wouldn't you say?" "Are you sure you can't fly?" Dicey teased him. Then she said yes, it was very good. It was better than she had managed. "Do you like any of the kids in your class?" she asked. Sammy shrugged, his eyes watching where the sandpaper rubbed at the wood. "The guys, well, you know, Dicey, they don't like goody-goodies." "It doesn't matter," he shrugged again. "It's okay with me." Dicey looked hard at him. His eyes were flat again. She wondered if that flat, holding-in expression was the one he wore all day long. "Is there anything you like about school?" "Phys ed, because we play games. You know, baseball and kickball. Don't you play those at recess, too?" "Not me." "Why not?" "If I did, I'd get angry, and if I exploded..." "You see, Dicey, when I get angry, I don't know what I'll do. So I watch, and that's okay. Another thing I like." "What's that?" "I like being good, because Graham will like it. Sometimes I wish I'd been better when Mama wanted me to." Alarm bells were clanging in Dicey's head. "Sammy Tillerman," she said, shaking her scraper at him. "You don't think it's your fault? About Mama?" He didn't answer. "But that wasn't anybody's fault, not even Mama's. It was just the way things happened." "But I didn't help," he said. "And Dicey, you know what they say about Graham." "But we know that's not true," Dicey said. "But if Graham..." Sammy said. He stopped himself. "And I like Graham," he added. "It's not so much trouble to be good in school, if I keep remembering." "Are you good, Sammy? I mean, you know what I mean. Are you?" "No, of course not. You know that. But that's okay. If I had a job... But I'm too young. It'll be years before I can help out with a job." Dicey thought for a minute. "Cripes," she finally said. You've given yourself a pretty hard job as it is, as far as I can see. And you're doing pretty good work at it," she said. He nodded, pleased. "But then that shouldn't surprise me, because I know how hard you can work," Dicey said. "Yeah, I can, can't I?" "Maybe you've outgrown fighting," she suggested. He shook his head. "I used to get in fights," Dicey told him. "You never said that," he protested. "You never asked me," Dicey countered. "I used to fight with girls and boys, and just about anyone. I can't even remember how many fights I was in, but I used to win a lot." "Of course," Sammy said. "And I'll tell you something funny. Not ha-ha funny, but queer. You want to hear it? Okay. I used to feel good after, even if I lost, as if, I don't know, as if I'd exploded and now it was over. He stared up at her. You never get in trouble, he told her. Dicey laughed. I'm in trouble right now, she told him, feeling not at all upset about home ec in the apron. I'm in trouble and I don't even care, because she hadn't thought of this before. It's my own trouble I made myself. Sammy just stared at her. Then he turned back to his work and Dicey went back to hers. They worked without talking for an hour or more. Then Dicey felt a rubbing on her back, going around and around. Sammy was sanding her back. She turned around and scraped down the leg of his jeans, but she had to bend over to do that, and he started sanding her fanny. He was giggling. Dicey dropped the scraper and grabbed hold of his ankles. Sammy toppled over into the dirt beside her. Before he could scramble up again, she started to tickle him under the arms. He squirmed and twisted under her hands, hammering on the ground with his fists. Then Sammy twisted around underneath her and wriggled free. He ran over to the workbench and stood there, poised to fight her if she came near him. Dicey made a growling noise on her knees like a tiger. She leapt at him. Sammy turned and ran to the dark side of the barn. He scrambled over the doorway into an empty stall. Hey, Dicey. His voice made little echoes from within the darkness. You okay? You could keep chickens in one of these. They're huge. Look. Dicey came over and unbolted the door. She stepped into the stall. Sammy heaved an armload of dry hay over her head. Dicey puffed and sneezed and brushed the brittle hay from her face and hair and shoulders. Just you wait until I get my hands on you, Sammy Tillerman, she said, trying to keep laughter out of her voice. He dashed past her, through the barn, out into the sunshine. Can't catch me, he called. Graham doesn't like chickens anyway, she answered to his disappearing back. Okay, we're going to stop right there because that seems like a natural pause. So I hope you guys are still enjoying the book, and I will try to read chapters more regularly. I've had a couple people comment that they're actually reading this book for their summer reading projects, which is awesome. And I'm so stoked if I'm helping make this a little more fun for you to get to hear it as well as reading it, because sometimes it helps you absorb things a little bit better. At least I find that true for me. So anyway, thanks so much for listening and watching, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. I'll be back soon with more stuff. Bye.